The countdown is on. Everything you need to get the edge at the end of the market day. This is The Close.
Just an hour left in the trading day and 6 hours left to vote in the state of New York. Live from Studio 2 at Bloomberg headquarters in New York, I'm Scarlett Fu.
And I'm Katie Greifeld. We're kicking you off to the closing bell here in the U.S. And if, like me, you thought the after-hour trade was going to be more exciting than the day of, maybe you're wrong, because you take a look at the rally right now, really building momentum. You have the S&P 500 up nearly 1%. A lot of those gains are coming from tech. Of course, you have Nvidia leading the way higher. You can see that in the NASDAQ 100 higher by about 1%. The bond market has been an interesting story. Of course, we had been higher on yields. Now we're almost completely unchanged on the 10-year yield, but it's all about the level. We are just below 430. And then you take a look at the VIX. You have some volatility draining from the market right now. Scarlett, you can see the VIX trading with the 21 handle.
All right, as you mentioned, stocks in rally mode as Americans cast their ballots. AI enthusiasm, thanks to Palantir, and big tech, thanks to Nvidia, are underpinning the advance. And for now, markets seem to be broadly following the contours of the Trump trade. So crypto and stocks charging higher, treasuries selling off after data showed the U.S. service sector expanded at the fastest pace in 2+ years. So it is now a waiting game for when the race will be called and in whose favor. And the closer it is, the longer the wait. Tight polls in the 7 battleground states show it's a toss-up between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, with the eventual victor likely presiding over a split Congress. Strategists at Barclays say volatility, which, Katie, you were just showing us, it has been steadily trending up since the start of September. It'll ease after the votes have been cast. Katie?
And one of the battleground states that we're keeping an eye on, of course, is Michigan. Where all polls will be closed by 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 p.m. local time. And that's exactly where we find Romaine Bostick, the anchor of this program. He is in the city of Detroit. And Romaine, let's talk about turnout. Of course, we've been watching turnout in Michigan. We know we could see a record today. What do we know so far?
Yeah, that's the anticipation. Polls opened about 8 hours ago. They close about 5 hours from now. Election officials are expecting what they think is either going to be near or record turnout. Remember, the record for the state of Michigan, that was actually set back in 2020 when about 70% of the electorate came out to cast their votes. This was the first election cycle, though, here in 2024, where Michigan allowed early voting. It started as early as October 19th in some parts of the state, October 26th in others. More than half of the electorate had already cast their votes before we even came into today, Tuesday. I spent some time this morning at a polling place in Northwest Detroit. We've now relocated back to downtown Detroit, a revitalized downtown Detroit, I should say. And you can see the cars behind me. That's I-75, the Fisher Freeway. Significant for a lot of reasons, because the candidates have spent a lot of time going up and down that freeway that runs from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan all the way down to Florida and Miami. Both candidates spending an inordinate amount of time here in the state of Michigan. In no other state have they spent more time other than in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, of course, it's pretty wild. Of course, when you lay it like that, we know that the stakes are very high here. We've talked a little bit about how people are voting. Let's talk about what they're voting on. When you think about some of the issues that are driving people, specifically in Michigan, to the polls, what are some of the top priorities here?
Well, you have to break it down, Katie, into two separate things. One is at the presidential level, most people are indeed worried about the economy. They have issues when it comes to reproductive rights, an issue when it comes to immigration policy. Foreign policy also going to be a big determinant of who wins the presidential election. But when you go down ballot to a key Senate race here involving Elissa Slotkin and her challenger, Mike Rogers, if you go down to two of the big congressional districts, House districts, I should say, that are open seats right now, that's going to be much more determined by manufacturing, jobs, job training, education, and more importantly, who actually supports the auto industry and in what fashion. Both of the candidates in that Senate race, Elissa Slotkin, as well as Mike Rogers, have pushed back on some of the EV mandates that we've heard coming down from the federal government. Though both have different approaches to how they see the future of the auto industry. Mike Rogers saying that basically refocus on gas and traditional fuel cars, while Elissa Slotkin, she is supportive of gas-powered vehicles, but wants to see more of a mix with hybrids and EVs as a way to counter the potential onslaught of vehicles coming out of China.
Yeah, it's an important reminder that the congressional down-ballot races are just as critical in Michigan as the presidential race as well. Talk a little bit about Michigan's importance to the overall electoral college. 15 electoral college votes this cycle, but really it's been a harbinger of how the nation votes as a whole.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because when you think about Michigan, it has been a Democratic stronghold for decades now, but it's always been a bit purple. In fact, if you go and you look at who they voted for in the presidential races, who they voted for at the Senate and the House levels here, it kind of oscillates between Democrats and Republicans every few years. In the most recent years, this has been a solidly Democratic state, that blue wall, if you will, that Trump finally did crack back in 2016, but by only a margin of 11,000 votes. In fact, that was the narrowest on a percentage point basis, the narrowest victory by a presidential candidate in this state in history. In fact, there's been only 2 other times where we had a presidential race being decided in this state by less than 1 percentage vote. You had to go back to Wendell Willkie, if you can believe it or not, when he was up against FDR. He won the state of Michigan that year. Of course, FDR won the national election. And prior to that, you had to go back to the 1800s when Grover Cleveland lost the state of Michigan.
Fantastic context there. Romaine, really appreciate your joining us. Romaine Bostick, of course, anchor of Bloomberg Television's The Close, and we will be checking in with him in the next hour. Meantime, you look at the markets, investors are trying to game the election with their investment picks. David Bianco is Chief Investment Officer of Americas at DWS Group, and he says if Trump wins, expect the financials, communications, and oil services to outperform into year end. If Harris wins, it'll be utilities, REITs, and staples. David joins us now. David, I think what's surprising to a lot of people is just how strong this market rally is on election day itself. It's as if markets have decided what we're going to get.
Happy election day. And markets do seem to be quite confident in the outcome, although that's surprising. The polls are tight. And I know some might say, how do you read markets? Well, if you look at the bond market, the equity market, and below the surface, certain sectors, it does seem like the equity market is confidently pricing a Trump win. That may be putting too heavy of odds on that outcome. In fact, we have to take this day by day. I'm thinking that there's a good chance, maybe a 20% or more chance, that we don't know the outcome in a decisive way by the opening bell tomorrow. So I think it's important to just take this day by day, and I'm sure we'll be talking more about this.
And not just not getting an outcome by tomorrow morning, if we don't get an outcome by tomorrow's close, what does the data show us in terms of what that could mean for equities?
Well, if we don't get an outcome by the close tomorrow, I think the S&P is easily down a few percent. And because then there's an indication that this is a contested election. It's going to take some time. The 2000 analog, the S&P 500 fell about 8% from election day until that was resolved. It took a few weeks. This time around, it may be a little bit more nerve-wracking given those involved here. So, yeah, I think that's a significant risk just for tomorrow morning and the rest of the week. And then we have a lot to learn over the coming days and weeks and months about, who the candidate is versus the way they campaign versus the way they govern if they win. Right. That's something that investors are very curious about.
Well, like you said, there's a lot we don't know here. So let's talk about the price action that we've seen. You mentioned the equity market seemingly pricing a Trump win. You could make the case for the bond market as well, that big climb up that we've seen in yield since the end of September. And with that in mind, if Trump does actually win, is it already priced in?
Largely. I would say anything at about 5,800 is pretty much fully priced a Trump victory, particularly until we find out more things like tariffs and the geopolitical circumstances. So I would argue that it's easy for the S&P 500 to find its way to about 5,500 or even lower should it take time to resolve the outcome of the election. And if Harris wins, even if it turns out to be a Republican Senate, which investors are counting on to prevent tax hikes, no tax hikes are priced into this equity market, particularly not for corporate taxes. But I could see Harris convincing 2 or 3 red state senators to raise the corporate tax rate and the high income tax rates on blue state high earners. So a lot to find out even after the election. It's an uncertain period for sure.
Well, specifically talking about corporate tax and how it ties into, of course, corporate America, there's a lot of daylight between what Kamala Harris is proposing for a corporate tax rate and what Donald Trump is proposing. And you've seen, certain sell-side banks sort of game out how that would impact the earnings power. And I'm curious what your take is. When you think about S&P 500 earnings under a higher tax rate, such as 28%, what does that look like?
Well, right now, the corporate tax rate, statutory rate's 21%. One of Trump's signature policies would expect that he defends that, even uses the veto to protect that 21% corporate tax rate. But if Kamala Harris wins and the deficit is a major issue, 28% as a corporate tax rate's on the table, that would hit S&P profits by about 7%. It varies by company and industry, given geography mix, and certain industries like REITs don't pay taxes. So if Harris wins, the bond market probably take some degree of comfort that maybe there'll be tax hikes that slow the economy, keep inflation low, maybe the 10-year yield comes down a little bit, and I would imagine utilities, REITs, and staples benefit.
So the deficit is a major issue no matter who wins, and certainly a long-term issue. And we also have a Fed meeting that begins tomorrow and concludes on Thursday. You mentioned that you're kind of surprised that the Fed has been unwilling to even discuss the deficit and how we address that.
It is surprising. And with the data that's come, it's hard to understand why they were really going to cut 2 days after the election. I would think they should take some time to figure out the circumstances and what type of policies are to come after this election. But if it's a contested election and there's no decision by 2 p.m. on Thursday, maybe a cut, maybe a 50 basis point cut would be appropriate. But I think this election absolutely has consequences because monetary policy needs to calibrate up against whatever the fiscal policies are. We don't know.
We don't know. All right. Jim, really appreciate your joining us today. David Bianco. Got my Biancos mixed up. David Bianco is CIO of Americas at DWS Group. Really appreciate your coming in today. We'll be right back. This is The Close on Bloomberg.
And we're keeping an eye on Supermicro, of course, the company getting ready to release a business update later today. Of course, the server maker's results likely to be overshadowed by questions over delisting concerns. That's after SMCI failed to file its annual 10K report and their auditor resigned. Joining us now to discuss is Jin Ho. He is Bloomberg Intelligence's senior hardware and networking analyst. And you were reminding us in the commercial break that this isn't an earnings report, it's a business update. And what are we hoping to learn after the close today?
Well, Katie, quite frankly, I don't know what is going to be disclosed because they don't have an auditor. They might just have a press release. I'm not even sure if they'll have an earnings call. The one thing that I will say is that they provided an update in terms of their business activity back in early October of the number of servers that they've sold and how many GPUs. They sold 100,000 GPUs since June. So, look, I think they're going to, if they can report numbers, decent numbers, the question is are they going to provide an outlook? And I doubt that.
Yeah, again, no auditor, just a reminder here. Supermicro, of course, was a beneficiary of all the AI excitement. And as a server maker, it's certainly in the right business line. It accounts for 8% of NVIDIA sales. Do we think that there's going to be any kind of disruption that this might cause to NVIDIA, which is itself due to report earnings later this month?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Scarlett. From an NVIDIA standpoint, I really don't think so. I mean, we came back from a conference a couple of weeks back, and what we saw was a lot more AI server vendors. This was not the case a year ago, where Supermicro and Dell were among the leaders. So NVIDIA seems to have secured the supply chain. So if there was any disruption from Supermicro, they can reallocate those GPUs to somebody else. So those sales could probably be reallocated to a Taiwanese ODM or to Dell, for instance.
Yeah, it's a nice reminder that the daisy chain between all these different companies is pretty intricate. But let's just talk about what a fall from grace it has been for Supermicro. You think about 8 months ago, we were talking about shares at a record high. Now we're talking about the possibility of an S&P 500 removal. Of course, shares were just added in March. It's been pretty spectacular.
Well, the share drop has been spectacular. I will say that the share drop doesn't align with the fundamentals. There are some technical factors that are driving the shares down. If you think about it, a delisting would hit some investor covenants. Keep in mind that 51% of the shares are owned by institutions, and they may be forced to sell. And then there are about 24% of the shares are owned by passives and 8% of S&P index funds. So if they get kicked off the S&P, there's another forced selling activity there.
Well, Jin, I want to go back to that point that EY, its accountant, its auditors resigned, and therefore the company can't actually release financial results. Is there fraud here? What are your thoughts when it comes to corporate governance, and how seriously should we be concerned about a fundamental issue here?
Yeah, so look, this is the second time that, they've already been delisted once for accounting fraud or issues. When you read through the 8K in terms of the E&Y resignation, there were words that included integrity of the board. And, I haven't read anything like that in quite some time now. So, I'm not going to point to fraud right away. But when the auditor has a tough time signing off on the 10K because of integrity issues, where there's smoke, there might be some fire.
All right, good stuff. Bloomberg Intelligence's Jin Ho giving us the latest here on Supermicro, as we were joking, maybe not so super anymore. Coming up, the 53-day strike against Boeing finally over. Next in Top Calls, we'll talk about the long-term ramifications for the aircraft maker. This is The Close on Bloomberg. For our top calls, a look at some of the big movers on the back of analyst recommendations. And let's start with Carvana. The used car online retailer raised to equal weight at Morgan Stanley. The price target getting a huge boost to $260, up from $110. Analyst Adam Jonas says Carvana's quarterly report was far stronger than expected. He says its increased profitability took the firm by surprise and largely justifies the stock's re-rating. Shares up 4.5%. Katie?
Let's also take a look at eBay here, because Bernstein upgrading the e-commerce platform to outperform from market perform. The analyst says that he's increasingly encouraged by eBay's progression on gross merchandise value growth. That's after last week's sell-off following its quarterly report. The analyst now sees it as an attractive buying opportunity for investors. They seem to agree, because shares up about 1.7%, Scarlett.
And let's end on Dollar Tree, a downgrade to market perform from outperform over at Telsey Advisory Group. This comes after Rick Drayling announced he was stepping down as CEO. The Telsey analyst saying Drayling's departure reduces his confidence in Dollar Tree's strategy and execution heading into the crucial holiday season. Shares down about 0.5% right now. And those are some of our top calls. All right, let's pivot to one of the most talked about companies this year, Boeing. Its workers agreed to a 38% wage increase over 4 years, finally ending the strike against the plane maker. Union President John Holden weighed in after the vote was finalized.
They secured a victory. They voted by 59% to accept the agreement, and they get to move forward. The strike will end, and now it's our job to get back to work and start building the airplanes, increase the rates, and bring this company back to financial success.
Joining us now for more is David Strauss, U.S. aerospace and defense analyst at Barclays, with an equal weight rating on Boeing. So, David, I look at the share price of Boeing today, down more than 2% on a day where the S&P 500 is gaining 1% and everything is moving higher. Shouldn't the fact that the strike ended be cause for a relief rally in the stock?
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. We're a little surprised, that the stock is down, but at the same time, Boeing just did a large equity offering, about 5% below where the stock is currently trading. So we think this could represent some profit taking by investors that got into the stock at around $143, which is where the equity offering was. And with the strike now out of the way, the hard work begins for Boeing. There are no specific positive catalysts per se from here over the near term. They just need to get back to building and delivering airplanes. So we think it's really just some short-term profit taking in terms of what we're seeing today.
Got it. All right. Well, the union president, John Holden, saying let's get back to work. What are you thinking in terms of how long it'll take to ramp up production to get back to where they need to be?
We expect it's going to take a while. The last thing that Boeing can really afford to do right now, given their position, the oversight with the FAA, is to go too quickly and potentially have some sort of quality escape or manufacturing issues. So we would expect, the new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, to take it very slow. The company basically warned of that on the last call, on the Q3 call. They said expectations very low for cash flow for this year as well as for next year. So the expectation is that they'll go slowly. Plus, you have the holidays, Thanksgiving holidays, Christmas holidays, which would naturally slow things down anyway. So we think it's gonna take a while to get back to kind of the 25 a month rate that Boeing was at on the MAX pre the strike.
Well, David, what should we be watching for next? Like you said, Kelly Ortberg, he's going to take things slow, but we know the company has already announced a 10% reduction in their workforce. It's been reported that they're taking a look at different businesses to see, what might change there. I mean, what are you keeping an eye out for to sort of mark the next stage of progress?
By far, the most important thing for Boeing is to get back to building 737 MAX airplanes and delivering. The airlines are waiting for airplanes. Boeing has a huge backlog. That is their major source of cash generation. So by far and away, that is the biggest issue. So we're going to be tracking the number of airplanes that fly off the line, which is a good proxy for how many they produce, and obviously tracking how many they are able to deliver to the airlines. Beyond that, Boeing did an equity offering that provides them a fair amount of cushion in terms of their balance sheet. So they're in pretty good shape there. But there is the potential for them to look to divest some things that might not fit out of their service portfolio, that given where valuations are today for those kind of properties could bring pretty good value and maybe be a bit accretive to where Boeing's currently trading.
Well, David, just quickly here, like you said, the focus has to be getting manufacturing back up to speed, of course, production quality. When you think about things that people might consider sort of on the side, the space business, for example, do you think that we could see Boeing explore a sale there?
So their joint venture, United Launch Alliance with Lockheed Martin, apparently has been up for sale for quite a while. We're not that surprised. It's proving a little bit difficult to maybe sell that business given the competition there with SpaceX. Beyond that, the space portfolio that Boeing still has is relatively small. They do have, the Starliner program that's been problematic. So if possible, it would be great for them to kind of shrink their losses there. But the more meaningful divestitures more likely would come out of their services portfolio.
All right, David, have to leave it there. Really appreciate your time. That is David Strauss over at Barclays. Coming up, millions of voters heading to the polls right now. We'll have the latest next. This is Bloomberg.
It's just about 3:30 p.m. in New York. This is the countdown to the close. I'm Scarlett Fu.
And I'm Katie Greifeld. Of course, it's election day. I keep hearing that there's an election today, and it's interesting. You can see that in the stock market. You take a look at the two most actively traded shares right now. It's DJT, that's number 2. It's Palantir. That, of course, is earnings, but it could also be a Trump play.
Right, because of Peter Thiel, and he's been a big booster of Donald Trump. But I want to go to DJT for a moment here, because that stock has been all over the place today. It was flying high, and then it tanked about 30 minutes ago, and it was suspended from trading because of the volatility. It's now back in the green again, up by 4.5%, but it's been everywhere again, and this has become kind of a proxy for the odds of Donald Trump winning election.
Right. No, it's just been wild. First of all, the volatility, like you say, also the volume. So I anchor this show called Open Interest. It's every day, 9 to 11 Eastern, and every day pre-market. It's amazing. It's often DJT that is the most popularly traded. So there's big money behind this, even if it's all, retail. You are seeing a lot of volume. So we'll continue to watch that one, at least for today, a little bit higher, 5% or so. Pedestrian when you consider the history of this stock. But Let's continue on the election right now, because many are turning to the history books for insight on how this election cycle will play out. You have research from Goldman Sachs that finds that the incumbent party wins the presidential election in the post-World War II era unless there's a recession. Since 1951, the incumbent has lost when the election took place soon after a recession. And there are also 2 instances where the party in the White House lost after a recession when the incumbent candidate was not on the ballot. So will history repeat itself, or will this year's results buck the trend? Let's talk about it now with Jim Lindsay. He is Director of Fellowship Affairs over at the Council on Foreign Relations. So that's the history, Jim. But you think about this strange economy, this strange economic cycle that we've really been living in since the pandemic. How do you think that will factor into the vote today?
Well, thank you for having me on. Clearly, the economy is issue number 1 with American voters. If you look at the polling data, a lot of Americans are convinced that they're worse off than they were 4 years ago, even though by most standard measures of economic performance, the U.S. economy is going gangbusters. And so I think it's going to greatly influence the outcome. That being said, economics is not the only issue on the ballot today.
Well, talk to us a little bit about what some of those other issues are. What do you think is high on the priority list as Americans head to the polls? Of course, we talk about inflation all the time. We talk about the labor market, but you make a good point. It's not the only thing we talk about.
Well, obviously, a lot of the recent economic news has been good, but the other issues that be driving people at the polls, abortion, with the overturning of Roe v. Wade with the Dobbs decision, has been a major issue across the country. We've seen Democrats benefit at the polls in the wake of that decision. Obviously, the condition or situation at the southern border is a major issue for people. I think for many Americans, it really comes down to the 2 candidates at the top of the ticket, whether you believe that they're going to strengthen American democracy or pose a threat to it.
I mean, we can definitely focus on the 2 candidates at the top of the ballot for the U.S., but what's interesting here is when you look at the elections that have taken place across the globe in 2024, incumbents everywhere have been pretty unpopular. You saw it in the UK, where the incumbent did not win. France's ruling coalition lost seats, and most recently in Japan, the long-ruling LDP suffered one of its worst electoral results. What does it mean, Jim, that across the globe, voters are disillusioned with the incumbent and have chosen the challengers to lead their country?
Well, I think we're seeing this in part because of the fallout from COVID-19, which shook up an awful lot of economies around the world, challenged governments with novel issues, and some of them didn't handle them terribly well, and we've seen the results of the ballot box. But I think if you look at the U.S., in some ways, it may break the trend. If you look at public opinion polls, obviously, this is an election that's a nail-biter. It could go either way. I think in a lot of the other elections you referred to, the fact is that going into the election, it was pretty clear the incumbent was going to lose and lose significantly. I think what's different here is, unlike all those other countries, the American economy is actually performing very well. Mm-hmm. And to some extent, Kamala Harris is both an incumbent and not an incumbent. Before Joe Biden dropped out of the race, it looked as if Donald Trump was going to run away with the election. The shift from Biden to Harris created the opportunity for her and for Democrats more broadly to argue that they are the agents of change.
No, and I'm glad you bring that up. It's hard to make the case that Harris is the status quo when, in fact, she's a very different candidate than Joe Biden. Now that she's teamed up with Liz Cheney and other Republicans who have fallen out with Donald Trump, does that create enough of a change, a different candidate from the Biden track, from the status quo?
Well, I think we're going to find out once all the votes are counted. I think this is the big question hanging over the election. Again, the polls may have gotten it right, or they may be off, but clearly, at least going into this election, it's neck and neck.
Well, let's talk about the polls a little bit more, because I'm taking a look at some of your recent writing. You point to 2016, 2020, especially in 2016, when the polls did not exactly inform reality. And it feels like we've been within the margin of error. We've been really in a dead heat for months at this point. And I mean, for the average voter, what is one to take from that?
Well, I think you have to understand sort of the history of polls. Polls in 2016 and 2020 clearly underestimated Donald Trump's strength. And that has a lot to do with the difficulty in reaching out and actually getting responses from Trump voters. But in 2022, during the congressional midterms, what happened was polls underestimated the strength of Democrats. And indeed, during this primary season, polls didn't underestimate Donald Trump's strength. They exaggerated Donald Trump's strength. So going into this, the big question is, how are the polls going to end up? And I will note that pollsters, like almost anyone else, try to learn from their mistakes and are trying to always improve the way they go about and do those polls. And however the polls turn out after the vote is counted, they're going to be going back through all of their methods and asking what needs to be tweaked for 2026 and 2028.
Jim, I want to go back to the idea of challenger versus status quo, because we talked about how Harris represents a change from the status quo. Can Donald Trump really be construed as a challenger when he's a known quantity, when he has already presided over an administration? What is it about the platform he's been running on, the narrative he's been able to push, that has convinced a sizable portion of the electorate that he is the change candidate?
Well, Donald Trump is arguing that he's the change candidate because he's been out of office for 4 years. And his pitch to the American public has clearly been that you were better off if I had stayed on, so bring me back in. I think one of the very interesting things about the Harris campaign is how they have tried to position her as the candidate of change. One of her arguments to the American public is it's time to break from the Trump era and move on, have a new generation of leadership, a new generation that is focused on trying to find solutions and to bring America together rather than focusing on America's divisions. And again, we'll find out in the next day or two which of those arguments persuaded enough voters to give victory in the Electoral College to one candidate or the other.
Jim, really appreciate your joining us today. Jim Lindsay is Director of Fellowship Affairs at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you. Coming up, we are looking at shares of Palantir. We mentioned it earlier, but they're popping higher after delivering third quarter results that beat analyst estimates and also raised their full year forecast. It is our stock of the hour, and the stock is up about 25% right now. This is The Close on Bloomberg. And you're looking at Harris campaign headquarters in Washington, where Kamala Harris, the vice president, just was. Of course, she is going to make her way to Howard University later on this evening for her final election watch result, although that could go late
I know, she might be there for a while, because who knows when we'll actually get a result here.
All right, but in any case, we'll keep an eye for you on the different candidates and let you know what's going on over there. In the meantime, we're watching the markets and we're watching shares of Palantir up about 24% on the day, hitting a record high after reporting better than expected quarterly revenue and citing strong demand for AI software in the U.S. Abigail Doolittle has been tracking the company and joins us now. And Abigail, this is really about how they're building out their commercial business in addition to their government business, which has done very well.
It is about building out the commercial business, but I would say the government business is really the big deal. So what happened here, as you mentioned, they beat. They also raised operating income for the full year. And then there's this language around AI that really only applies to the demand on enterprise, about 40% of the business. I would argue that the 60% of the business, the bulk of the business, the government, defense, the espionage, intelligence units, location, that's really the business. And what happened here is just a ton of growth. 2 years ago for this quarter, they put up 16% sales growth. For the quarter a year ago, they put up 20% growth. Now 30% growth. That's really moving in the right direction. There are clearly a lot of geopolitical tensions for this company to potentially benefit from. And what they do, because we often talk about Palantir as a raw data company, what they do is they take the raw data and then they put it into a visualized form for folks so that those people can then make informed decisions.
Yeah, and it's just wild looking at the 5-year chart. I feel like Palantir was one of the first companies that we attached AI to and really was part of the start of that craze. And it's interesting because if we're talking about software with Palantir, it feels like when we talk about the AI investing theme, we often talk about hardware. We talk about the picks and shovels. commercials, we talk about chips, but we're talking about a software company here, and maybe some of the AI investment attention is heading more towards software names.
Well, so it's interesting. I was speaking to one analyst who was saying in terms of the AI for this company that he does not completely get it. And this is one of the big things around this company. The company often talks to Wall Street analysts saying, you don't fully understand our story. But because of the interaction around the AI, this analyst was saying that he wasn't necessarily sure that this AI demand that's being talked about is quite as real, that it could really be more just the robust growth for the government side. So stay tuned. We'll have to see whether or not they can create more transparency around that AI demand, the software, the enterprise, and then the government business.
Well, at least for right now, shares are absolutely flying, of course, up nearly 25%. Abigail Doolittle, thank you, of course, reporting on Palantir. Now, we do want to bring you some breaking news. This out of Apple. We just got this headline that Apple to face first EU fine under the bloc's Digital Markets Act. So some interesting action there. You take a look at Apple, though, it's been pretty resilient. Shares up about 0.4%, maybe a little bit of a tick lower on that headline, but we'll continue to follow that story. Now, coming up, we'll take you to the closing bell. We're going to do that with Kimberly Forrest. She is the founder and chief investment officer with Bokeh Capital Partners. This is The Close on Bloomberg.
Markets do seem to be quite confident in the outcome, although that's surprising. The polls are tight, and I know some might say, how do you read markets? Well, if you look at the bond market, the equity market, and below the surface, certain sectors, it does seem like the equity market is confidently pricing a Trump win.
That was David Bianco, Chief Investment Officer of Americas at DWS Group, kicking off the show, talking about how markets have been pricing in this Trump victory. The Trump trade continues. And to the extent that we get a result, perhaps by the end of this evening, I know
Fingers
that might
crossed.
Be too much to ask for.
By the end of this evening,
Maybe the gains hold, but if not, he was expecting declines tomorrow if, it looks like it might be a couple of days before we get anything.
Yeah, I'm super interested to see the market's reaction function here because we've seen a lot of volatility even just this week. Seeing it again today because you take a look at the S&P 500, suddenly we're looking at these big gains. That wasn't the case, of course, when trading first kicked off, but now up more than 1% on the S&P 500, those gains being led by the big tech names. You can see that in the NASDAQ 100. How about the bond market, Scarlet Fu? Because you take a look at the 10-year yield.
Nothing right now.
I know, and that in and of itself is exciting because the bond market has been all over the place. But at least for right now, we are back to unchanged, still at pretty high levels, just below 430. And then you take a look at the volatility index. The VIX, it has been a little bit higher relative to recent history, but at least for today, taking a little bit of a breath, currently trading just below a 21 handle.
Yeah, I think we can characterize the bond market as taking a little bit of a breath too after that massive sell-off, right?
Yeah.
So, little change at the moment, but we'll keep an eye on that one. In the meantime, let's bring in Kimberly Forrest, founder and CIO of Bokeh Capital Partners. She joins us now from Pittsburgh. And Kim, I know that you have just been swamped by political ads over the past couple of weeks, and finally that's going to come to an end soon, right?
Oh, from your lips to, the programmer's ear at all of our local TV stations. Yeah, and I'm sure it's great for the local TV and radio stations because they're getting a lot of ad revenue. And that's the very best kind, right? Like, they don't care. They're not buying huge amounts or huge time periods. They're paying the rate. So, and we're paying the price by having to watch them.
Yes.
You were talking about the markets, and I'm thinking they're probably terrible poll predictors too, because I don't know that they know anything more than the people who are voting today.
No, that's a really good point. And so I guess let's go back to some of the trends that have been in place even before early voting really began in earnest. And a big part of that is the sell-off in treasuries. When you look at what's going on in treasuries, when do you expect to see things stabilize here? Is it going to come in the form of a Fed decision on Thursday?
I think that will help, certainly. I mean, they do set the overnight rate, and theoretically, at least the textbooks I've read, everything's supposed to go up from there. So I do think that Some of the economic data that has come in recently is making the bond market react, for sure. But it is kind of a difficult thing here because neither presidential candidate has been really excited about maybe lowering, bond issuance because we're actually not spending quite as much. So I think the bond market is its own kind of voting situation and telling us things as it crept higher this month.
We think about the Venn diagram between the two candidates, and it seems like more debt is definitely in the center there. But it's interesting. You think about some of the policies that have been proposed with Trump. We talk about his potential tariffs all the time. You think about some of the industries that could fall into the crosshairs. I think retail names. I think apparel makers. And, of course, we're looking ahead to retail earnings. What are you expecting out of that industry as you marry together, of course, the fundamentals with the known unknowns here?
Sure. Well, I love looking at retail and trying to pick winners and losers, but because it's just really fun to look at retail, right? I am seeing stress in the lower 2/3 of the economic ladder, let's just say. So that's pretty high up in the ladder. And I think clothing can be a discretionary item unless you're a kid that's growing out of it, right? So I think it's a dangerous, and we're going into the holiday season, which is a bigger buying time for apparel. So it's iffy, I'll tell you that. And I think, though, that good retailers always win because they know what tempts people and what delights them and what makes the dollars come out of their wallets for the stuff that they want. And that really is the what a good retailer should do, right? Is delight its customers with products they need and want.
So it sounds like in playing the game of trying to pick a winner, particularly in the retail space, you're looking for those names that sort of move beyond just discretionary purchases that maybe fall more into the staples category.
Right. And I didn't disclose anything. I don't own Walmart, but I make myself go to Walmart. And I have to tell you, their clothing looks really great on the rack. I haven't pulled the trigger and bought any, but they have completely changed my local Walmart. And it is a good-looking store offering differentiated products like I haven't seen before. So even though they they are the staples center, right, where you're going to go buy your flour and sugar and meat and milk and all that kind of stuff, but maybe they're doing a Target.
Yeah, no, these are all really important points. The winners within retail will just become stronger, and the ones that rely on the lower income households that are under pressure are definitely going to feel the pain. Speaking of earnings, most of big tech has reported, with the exception of NVIDIA, which is still to report on November 20th. What have we learned about the semiconductor industry, given the results that we've gotten? It's been fairly mixed. That could set up expectations heading into NVIDIA's numbers.
Right. Well, I think NVIDIA has gotten a green light that this is this is the company that's providing the picks and shovels for the AI revolution. That's pretty clear. And we'll just see how demand looks, though, for the next quarter and hopefully the next 6 months. I think that's what everybody is fearing. The biggest companies that are building out AI seem undeterred by the fact that nobody's really paying for their product all that much. And I'm talking to you, Meta, as well as Microsoft. So Google, did have a bright spot that its cloud, and especially the AI cloud, was driving some sales. But this is a build out without a customer yet, and that's always kind of frightening. And I think there's a little bit of thought going around about how long this can last.
All right, Kimberly, really appreciate your joining us today. Thank you so much, and good luck with getting through the rest of today. Kim Forrest is founder and CIO with Bokeh Capital Partners in Pittsburgh. Unfortunately for her, because she's been inundated with campaign ads for weeks now. We're moving closer to the closing bell. We've got full market coverage right here on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio.
The Closing Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close, starts right now.
We're about 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Scarlett Fu and Katie Greifeld here. And of course, joining us to take you through the closing bell with a global simulcast, Carol Massar and Tim Stenovic over in our radio studios. So together, we welcome our Bloomberg Television, radio, and YouTube audiences. And Carol, the market is higher. The stock market certainly is. The bond market has been struggling to find direction after that 10-year bond auction. But, you know, one thing to keep in mind is the stock market tends to rally on election day, up 9 of the last 11 election days with a median return of 0.8%.
Yeah, well, you know, I love that statistic from Ryan Dietrich right over at the Carson Group. I agree with you. It's how we kicked off our broadcast at 2 p.m. Wall Street time. I think that is great perspective of reminding everybody when we try to read into maybe today's trade, right, and all the prediction markets, trying to get an idea of what it says about the outcome. I think that's a really good thing. Look at the own, you know, Trump media. I mean, that stock alone has been all over the map today. So it's hard to kind of read in the market tea leaves right now.
We did see, we talked to John Authors a little earlier in our program, and we asked him specifically about how to read into DJT, whether it is actually like a bellwether for how people think Trump is going to do in the election. He said, that's one that you got to kind of take out of the Trump trade because it's so detached from fundamentals.
I'm glad he gave you a real answer. I feel like it's hard to read into that too seriously because we know that it's been so volatile, but big volume that we've seen in that stock. And you take a look at the broader indexes right now, not too bad when it comes to volume, pretty close to our 20-day average. People not really sitting on the sidelines right now. They're actively trading into these results.
Well, and of course, we'll see how they actively trade once we get any hint of the actual outcomes from the different polls. There you have the closing bell. You're looking at gains in excess of 1% for the Dow, for the S&P, and the Nasdaq. The Nasdaq, the best performing of the three, up 1.4%. S&P 500 gaining 1.25%, and the Dow Industrials, which Matt Miller was reminding us yesterday, get some new constituents on Friday, gaining 1%. And the winner of the bunch actually is the small caps, the Russell 2000.
Guys.
Yeah, gaining 1.9%. I mean, these are kind of part of the Trump trade as well, right? Because they're seen as being extra sensitive to interest rate cuts, certainly, but also protectionist measures would benefit them.
So interesting, right? All right. So going back to the big caps, guys, it's pretty broad-based in terms of the rally. 443 names in the S&P 500 to the upside, only about 60 names to the downside, Katie.
All right, let's take a look at the sector level. And I have a lot of good news. You have every sector in the green right now. It's
unless you're shorting the market.
That's true. Then you're probably not having a good time. But I feel like you haven't been having a good time for a long time. In any case, you take a look at the sector level, leading your way higher. You have the discretionary names, a real risk-on day on our hands. Industrials, utilities, also some of your biggest gainers. What's not doing so well, your laggards on the day, materials and energy, of course. And by the way, guys, we have an election today. We also have earnings season. Let's talk about Lumen Technologies. This is an interesting one. This stock has been absolutely on fire. You take a look at the results right now. You have third quarter adjusted loss per share coming in at 13 cents. The estimate had been for 8.5 cents. So a disappointment there. You can see shares moving lower. You take a look at revenue coming in just as expected, $3.22 billion. This is a company that signed a lot of partnerships with a lot of big tech, this telecoms company trying to capitalize on AI. But currently right now, a lot of disappointment in shares.
All right. And so we have another one crossing the Bloomberg terminal and NVIDIA.
It's some NVIDIA news.
Is that
NVIDIA
not
overtaking
earnings?
Apple.
Okay, forgive me. You scared me. I'm like, it's at the end of the month. Okay, NVIDIA overtaking Apple to reclaim the spot as the world's largest stock. Man, this is kind of interesting, right? As we think about how massive Apple is, how long it's been around, the twists and turns of this one. NVIDIA, which has been the talk of the town, for the last 1.5 years. Kind of amazing to see. Once again, the back and forth between these two names in terms of market cap. So let me just see as I pull it up. NVIDIA's market cap, $3.43 trillion. The stock alone, guys, up 182% so far here. And adding, again, obviously, as it overtakes Apple, 2.8% to the upside in today's trade. And why did I not have it as a gainer? I do not know. All right. Having said that, let's go to some of the individual gainers. Palantir Technologies, we talked about the earnings yesterday, up 23% here. here. Top gainer, I believe, in the S&P 500 here. The company, obviously a lot of revenue from global governments, reported third quarter results that beat expectations, raised its full year forecast, citing high demand in the U.S. for its AI software. So again, this is a stock that's up about 200% so far this year. Global Foundries, another big gainer, up almost 15% in today's trade. This is the U.S. maker of made-to-order semiconductors, top gainer in the NASDAQ 100. This one delivering a surprisingly upbeat forecast. And keep in mind that this is a name that has been in about a 2-year slump. So that upbeat outlook shows that it is really showing some upward momentum. If Matt was here, Real, I was doing this just for him. It's up about 20%
He can't stop
in today's
talking
trade.
about it.
No, he's really upset because he's like, small business, how much does it grow? It's a $3, under $4 stock here. Soaring the most in 8 months intraday. The company forecast adjusted EBITDA for the full year that beat the average analyst estimate. It is a small cap, about $393 million. It's up nearly 80%, though, so far this year, and it's about 25% of the float shorted. So just keep that in mind.
So a slightly bigger cap.
Less micro.
And this is kind of a setup for Tim, because Trump Media and Technology, guys, was up 18%, at its low down about 8.5%.
It finally finished
down
the downside.
About 1%. We know there's two trading halts today. So it's it's bridging the two of us today.
Always a risk putting such a volatile stock.
It should just get its own column,
but
it's a winner and a loser, a gainer and a decliner.
We don't have winners and losers here.
Sorry.
We have some decliners today, though. 6% to the downside. Archer Daniels Midland ADM saying that it will amend previous financial statements. It uncovered accounting issues, prompting the company to cancel its quarterly earnings call with analysts just 14 hours before it was due to start. ADM did say on Monday evening that it had identified additional errors in the way that it reported sales between the ag services and oilseeds, carbohydrate solutions, and nutrition business segments while testing new internal controls. Shares ended up falling today by close to 6%. Wynn Resorts falling 9.3%, Scarlett. This after the casino operator reported adjusted earnings per share for the third quarter that missed the average analyst estimates. I know, Scar, you got your eye on some companies reporting.
Yeah,
right?
Let's take a look at B&G Foods. They're the home of the green giant vegetable company, and frozen food is certainly an important indicator here.
So hot right now.
As we look at how people go through and kind of deal with inflation. All right, what can we tell you? It has cut its full year adjusted EPS forecast, so that's probably why the stock is down almost 6% in after hours trading. It had seen $300 to $315 million for full year adjusted EBITDA. It's now looking for anywhere from $295 million to $305 million. As for the third quarter adjusted EPS, 13 cents, missing the average analyst estimate of 20 cents a share.
Okay, I got what's going on over at Masimo Corporation. It's the health tech company that you might know about because it's been in the news with regard to an Apple lawsuit. The company's seeing fourth quarter revenue from $581 million to $611 million. So that coming in line with estimates at $607 million. Adjusted operating income for the fiscal year, they're reporting that it will be $325 million to $336 million. That comes in above estimates of $322.8 million. The stock unchanged, though, in the after hours.
All right, let me just pick up what's going on in yields, because it's been an interesting story, right? You had the better than expected services number, which came in, and that sent treasuries down, pushing yields up. And that kind of was the story until we got the 1 p.m. bond auction. $42 billion of 10-year notes sold, decent demand, and things have flipped around a little bit here. You can see the 2-year yield that's certainly on the short end continuing to move higher, but the 10-year now little changed. And at the long end, actually, you see yields coming down.
Which is funny. You were talking about the decent demand at the Treasury auction, of course. We've all been worried about bond vigilantes, which maybe it's a talking point, but there has been this incredible run-up that we've seen in Treasury yields over the past month and a half. People are really concerned about the deficit, but then you have auctions such as this one, which are a nice reminder that there's still plenty of people out there who want to buy U.S. debt.
When the deficit starts to matter, it'll be like it won't matter at all for a while, and then all of a sudden it'll really matter, and everyone will jump on the bandwagon.
Well, won't a lot matter the outcome of what happens in Congress after polls close today? Because you said no?
No, go on. I'm nodding.
Well, if there is a red sweep or a blue sweep, then it gives a green light to a certain extent to some of these policies.
Yeah.
And, we'll see if the bond vigilantes rear their heads and say, okay, no to some of these policies.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important point, right? What happens in Congress will determine what whoever wins in the White House can ultimately do and what it means in terms of spending. So we'll see. All right, guys, that is a wrap. A few earnings coming our way, and then we'll on to the election outcome. That's a wrap. Our cross-platform radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. We do it all. We'll see you again, same time, same place tomorrow.
Coming up on The Close, we've got a breakdown of what election trends are appearing so far. We've got GOP pollster Frank Luntz coming up next. This is The Close on Bloomberg. Welcome back to The Close. I'm Scarlett Fu.
And I'm Katie Greifeld. Let's take a look at where markets closed out the day on this election day 2024. You can see it was a rally and then some. The S&P 500 closing about 1.2% higher. A lot of those gains coming from big tech, of course, led by NVIDIA, which overtook Apple today as the world's biggest company. That led the NASDAQ 100 higher by about 1.3%. All quiet in the bond market. It's not too often these days that we can say that, but that 10-year Treasury yield almost perfectly unchanged. Of course, we got higher ISM services figures at around 10 a.m. Then we got a very strong auction. You add it together, perfect equilibrium, at least on the day. And then you take a look at the VIX. Volatility continuing to drain from this market, but still trading at pretty elevated levels. The VIX above 20, Scarlett.
All right, let's look at a couple of individual movers as well. Palantir, a big gainer on the day, up 24%, the latest poster child for AI excitement, climbing to a record after a beat and raise quarter thanks to high demand for its AI software. So it's building out its commercial business to go along with its government business. And Boeing closing down about 2.6%, workers finally agreeing to a new labor contract and ending their 53-day strike. Now it paves the way for the plane maker to resume production and shore up its finances, although everyone says it's not like flipping a switch. It'll take some time to get things going. Our top story this hour, of course, is the election. Stupid. Get it? Millions of voters across America heading to the polls in a dead heat presidential race and control of the House and Senate. Both Team Trump and Team Harris expressing cautious optimism that they will prevail in what's become the most expensive campaign in U.S. history, while state officials and election workers are on high alert for potential violence. The economy and immigration top the list of voter concerns.
And on that note, let's bring in Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick. He joins us live on the ground in Detroit, Michigan. And obviously, Romaine, we spent a lot of time, especially in the run-up to this election, talking about the national economy. But give us the state of play when it comes specifically to Michigan's economy, of course, as voters in that state head to the polls.
Yeah, and not just Michigan, but Detroit specifically, the greater Detroit metropolitan area, really a microcosm for a lot of the issues that have plagued this country when it comes to manufacturing. Of course, this was a great city, a thriving city back at the turn of the century in the 1900s, all the way up into the 50s and 60s, largely on the back of manufacturing and the auto industry. But it went into severe decline. Right behind me here, you can see the skyline of downtown Detroit, not an area that you would have wanted to walk around alone maybe about 2 decades ago. But it has changed in a dramatic way. Following the bankruptcy of the city back in 2013, major revitalization projects took place down here. A use of both public and private funds that included building new sports arenas, including the Little Caesars Arena, which is just down the street from me. And even where I'm standing right now, I'm at a bar and grill called Harry's Detroit. It's been here for decades. And at one point, it looked like it was going to close. I had a chance to catch up with the manager yesterday, and he talked a lot about this idea of how they had basically given up on this business because there was not anything going on around here. But that really turned around just about 10 years or so ago when the Little Caesars Arena opened up back in 2017, just down the street from where I'm at. You have Comerica Park, you have other sports arenas, a convention center, as well as new office buildings going up right now that have really breathed a huge amount of money into this area. And that continues on as we move into 2025.
Thank you for that local color. Really appreciate the descriptions from the ground there. You mentioned the amount of money that has been spent. We know that this election cycle has cost the political group somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 billion. It's super expensive. And of course, a lot of that spent on Michigan and the other battleground states. What can you tell us about the amount of time and money that's been spent on the state and to what extent that's paying off in terms of turnout?
Well, I can tell you this, more money has spent on ads in this state, the state of Michigan, than all but 2 other states. Of course, Pennsylvania leading the charge there. And it's also kind of interesting too, Scarlett, when you look at the complexion of the ads that are running here versus other parts of the country. In other parts of the country, you're seeing a lot more ads that are much more local. They're about the local congressional candidates and the Senate candidates. Here in Michigan, you're seeing a lot more national level ads, ones directed either at Trump or at Kamala Harris, whether it's paid for by the respective campaigns or by political action committees. They really seem to be tapping into a lot of the hot button national issues, whether it's the economy, whether it's immigration, whether it's reproductive rights, or whether, quite frankly, it is the integrity of our democracy. Those are the ads that you see running here on repeat. And when I talk to people on the street, Scarlett, they're kind of tired of it. They kind of want this to be over. They say they've been inundated, not only by the ads, but the dozens and dozens of visits that these candidates have made to the state of Michigan over the past few months.
Yeah, they have election fatigue, and really, who can blame them at this point? Romaine, I know you've been talking to folks on the ground, including the Michigan Secretary of State. Tell us a little bit about what you learned.
Yeah, this has been kind of a hotbed of conspiracy theory activity. Of course, the 2020 election was kind of the centerpiece for Trump's Stop the Steal campaign here. Basically, the idea that he thought that there was some sort of fraud going on, something that has been thoroughly debunked. But now in 2024, those issues, those conspiracy theories around fraud have bubbled back up again, including from none other than Sir Elon Musk. I had a chance to catch up with the Michigan Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson. Here's what she had to say about protecting the integrity of this election.
We encourage questions about the process because we know it's fair, we know it's secure. We've set up a website, michigan.gov/electionfacts, where people can go and see many of their questions that they ask be answered. But at the same time, transparency is our friend. There are hundreds of observers and challengers all across the state, everywhere someone's voting or a vote is being tabulated, watching the process. And they'll be there to catch anything if something awry occurs, or hopefully reaffirm the security of the process after the fact.
And of course, it's not just challenges coming from folks in state. I mean, you had a very public back and forth with Elon Musk online, a lot of conspiracy theories about the number of voters on the rolls and maybe the discrepancy in the actual number of people eligible to vote.
Yeah, truth and facts are always on our side. We say often, and we've posted a dashboard, michigan.gov/voting dashboard, where people can see themselves what the facts are. We have 7.2 million active registered voters in the state of Michigan out of 7.9 eligible. And that's a great thing. We're proud that so many people are registered to vote in our state, and we want everyone, including Elon Musk himself, to have access to trusted information that hopefully he will choose to spread instead of spreading misinformation to further political agendas.
And I am curious about some of the policies you've put in place as Secretary of State, policies that are specifically designed to increase voter access.
Yeah, it's really important to me that we're doing everything we can to make it easier to vote and harder to cheat in our state. And that's exactly what we've done over the last several years, expanding access to the vote while implementing more transparency and security measures, training more election workers to implement those measures, and also post-election audits that we've implemented over these last several years to reaffirm the procedures and results after the fact.
This is the first year that we've had early voting, the first big election cycle we've had early voting in the state of Michigan. How do you rate it so far?
It's been an extraordinary success. To see 1.2 million Michiganders all across the state choose to vote early in person really reinforces that if you make voting more convenient, people will show up and use those convenient options to make their voice heard. And that's exactly what we saw this year.
All right, I know you've got a lot of work to do. I assume it's going to be a late night for you tonight.
It will, but we're proud to do this work. We've been preparing for years for today, and so we're ready. And I'm optimistic that we'll see a smooth election process. And if not, we'll be ready to address or de-escalate anything that might erupt or occur.
And Secretary Benson also told me that she does expect that for most of the counties and districts in the state of Michigan, that they should have those tabulations done, if not late tonight, sometime early on Wednesday, though she did say there could be a few areas here and there that might take a little bit longer.
All right, fair warning then from the Secretary of State of Michigan to us. Thank you so much. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick on the scene in Detroit. And of course, he will be in Michigan this evening when we have full special coverage of the election starting at 5 p.m. Eastern time. We also have some breaking news out of Supermicro Computer. This is the server maker, which was supposed to report earnings, but this is not earnings. This is its business update because it lost its auditor, Yes, EY, excuse me. Let's tell you about what happened in the quarter. Second quarter net sales, $5.5 billion to $6.1 billion. Analysts were looking for $6.79 billion, so that forecast coming in much later than anticipated. Supermicro also says it sees second quarter adjusted EPS of 56 cents to 65 cents. Analysts were anticipating 80 cents. So again, a much weaker forecast here for Supermicro, which of course is relies on sales to NVIDIA for a lot of its business.
Yeah, it's interesting. Of course, on the accounting issues, Supermicro saying that they see no evidence of fraud or misconduct of management. They remain unable to predict when Form 10K will be filed here, but they're going to take all steps to achieve NASDAQ compliance. Shares down 13% after hours. The stock was down 45% last week, so just a fascinating story. We'll continue to follow that. And coming up, we're diving deeper into election coverage with GOP pollster Frank Luntz. That conversation up next. This is The Close on Bloomberg.
It is election day in the U.S. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris closing out their campaigns in a final flurry, a push across key battleground states. Let's bring in now pollster and communications analyst Frank Luntz to get his take on what he's watching right now. So, Frank, you can slice and dice the demographics into many different ways. What are you focused on at the moment?
I'm focused on Latino and Hispanic voters, because there's clearly been a reaction to what Trump said a week ago Sunday at Madison Square Garden. It's had an impact. We just don't know how much. Some people did change their minds. The question is how many and in what state, because in the end, it only matters in Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Arizona. Second is that we've seen some indication that Vice President Harris is doing particularly well among older women. We know the story about younger women, and we're just trying to measure the turnout. But older women, normally Trump would be doing well among people over age 60. But it appears that older women also have been moving towards Harris in the remaining 48, 72 hours. So tonight I'm going to be looking at that demographic. In terms of states, it's not just Pennsylvania, it's also Michigan. What did the voters of Dearborn, Muslim and Arab American, are they going to turn out for Harris? Or are they going to refuse to give her their support as they did to Joe Biden earlier this year in the Democratic primary? Each of these groups matter tremendously because this election is on a razor's edge. So the question is twofold. Number one is, did they break for Harris in the end? And number two is, do they actually come out and vote? Because in the end, you can support someone, but it doesn't matter unless they cast their ballot.
Absolutely. So I want to go to one of the groups that you mentioned, which is the over 65 female vote, where you say Kamala Harris seems to be gaining some ground there. How much of that is tied to the numbers out of Iowa, the Seltzer poll that showed that she was actually leading and kind of, surprised everyone?
That's going to be the most significant poll of this election. Either that pollster, because it is alone. No one else has projected anything like that in a state that's been voting Republican for president for a number of elections now. There was no indication that this could be happening. So either that pollster is going to find themselves without work in the next 48 hours, or they're going to be celebrated as showing a different look at the electorate. We don't know yet, but we're going to know in a few hours. In the end, it's been so difficult to poll because the numbers in 2016 and 2020 undercounted Donald Trump by a lot. And pollsters were clearly trying to compensate for that in 2024. You get it wrong 3 times in a row, and that's the end of the industry. So the question is whether they've overcompensated, and we won't know that for another few hours. But clearly, that group, that segment of the population is going to matter because they vote in such high numbers.
Right. Yeah. And of course, that poll that you're referencing certainly moved markets yesterday. Definitely a big surprise across the bond market. I want to go back to union households. I think that's a really interesting point. Of course, you had the 50-plus day strike with Boeing finally end, reaching some sort of agreement with their union. We know that President Biden spoke with Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg on that labor contract. Julie Su was heavily heavily involved as well. But when it comes to how the union households, not the union leadership, are going to vote, that's an open question.
Yes, and that's exactly it, because they're going against their union leadership. They're openly defying them. Typically, Democrats win union households by about 20%, maybe 25%. This time, if you take out government unions who are supporting Harris by 80-20, and the teachers union who is supporting Harris by maybe 75-25, if you use people and focus on people who work with their hands, the AFL-CIO, the Teamsters, we see it as almost 50-50 between them, and that is absolutely essential in Pennsylvania and Michigan. If those numbers hold, and if they get the same kind of turnout that some of these other groups have been doing, then Donald Trump is going to end up elected. So that's why we are following that so carefully, because that's a change from previous elections.
And Frank, something I'm curious about, it feels like this election cycle, you've really seen prediction markets, betting markets take off in a big way. You, of course, have been in the polling business for a long time. You've seen many presidential cycles. I'm curious what you make of this uprise that we're seeing in prediction markets and how much information you can actually glean from them.
I can glean a lot. And they've been on the side of Donald Trump now for, 10 days, and the numbers actually expanded, predicting a Trump victory. There's a AI company that is predicting exactly the opposite. These young men who dropped out of high school have been modeling now for the last few weeks, and they show that it's going to be a Harris victory. So in the end, someone is going to be incredibly right and very profitable, and someone's going to be incredibly wrong. Mm-hmm. The polling is dead even. These betting sites are on Trump's side, and the AI sites are on Harris's side in terms of who's going to win. We're going to be counting votes for days, for the next 72 hours, even though the election will be over at 8 p.m. And in the end, you can't both be correct. So let's find out whether AI is a better predictor, the polling's a better predictor, or the betting sites are the best predictors.
Frank, when it comes down to it, and you had mentioned this earlier at the top, that people can be as vocally supportive of one candidate over the other as they want, but it doesn't matter unless they actually get off the couch and go and cast a ballot. Which group is the most reliable out of all the different demographics that you were telling us about? Which group is the most reliable in terms of going out and actually voting?
Older voters. The older you are, the more likely you are to vote. The better educated you are, the more likely you are to vote. Vice President Harris is depending on young women, 18 to 34, to give her a margin of victory. They are not predictable voters, but they seem to have participated in much of the early voting. And for Trump, he's depending on people who don't normally participate in politics to give him a margin, particularly in these Rust Belt states. So there's a cross current that's going back and forth, and it makes people like me, it makes our job very difficult to be accurate and honest with people who are watching. One last thing, this election is not going to be over tonight, and I am concerned about where we go in the coming hours and days as all the votes come in. And I'm afraid that we're going to have challenges to the election process. Yeah. And I urge viewers to take it easy, let the votes get counted. Every vote should be counted, and every count should be verified. We all agree on that. Let's not jump to conclusions, because I'm afraid of social media and it projecting a story that isn't accurate.
And hopefully the candidates will lead the way on that as well. Frank Luntz, pollster and communications analyst, thank you so much. It's going to be a busy night for you, Frank. Good luck. All right, time now for the top three, where we name drop some of the people who have been driving some of the day's most talked about stories. And steering clear of the election for a moment here, just a moment. Yeah. First up is LeBron James. The NBA star is in talks to merge his TV and film production business with the company behind the Kardashians. This, according to people familiar with the matter. So these two companies, Spring Hill and Fullwell 73, have been talking for months. Yeah, and I didn't realize that the company behind the Kardashians was British, actually. So you learn something new every day. Let's also talk about Moderna executive Stéphane Bancel. He has, apparently Bloomberg has learned that he's stepping down as the biotech company's chief commercial officer. He will stay on as its CEO. I did not know that he was playing double duty. I know. This was news to me as well. Yeah. Moderna has two products, the COVID vaccine and the RSV vaccine, but the pandemic is behind us, and the RSV vaccine has not been selling as well, so he's got his work cut out for him. He kind of has to focus.
Trying to diversify there. We'll see, of course. Now he is, he can focus.
He can focus, yeah. Someone else will be the full-time sales chief. The last person on the docket is Steve Schwarzman. He's a billionaire co-founder of Blackstone. He missed a pre-election gala at the New York Public Library, which is housed in a building named after him.
Well, maybe he has a ton of buildings that are named after him. He's like, I don't need to go to this one in particular. Of course, Steve Schwarzman, he is a Donald Trump supporter. Also, not at this party was Ray McGuire. We know that he is a Kamala Harris supporter, so no shows on both sides.
Right, and he's the vice chair of the board, whereas Schwarzman is the chairman of the board. So, the top two guys decided not to make an appearance, and so everyone who did go could avoid talking about politics.
They were busy.
They were busy. All right, speaking of CEOs, executives can't stop talking about the election. Earnings calls in recent weeks filled with talk of election uncertainty. Mentions of the two words in proximity to each other this year significantly higher than in the lead up to the 2020 election. Joining us now to discuss all of this, CEOs and their communications around the elections and their management through the elections, is Craig Buchholz. He is Burson's U.S. CEO. Craig, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. What's really clear from that chart we just saw, and clearly the anecdotal, is that the election has been a distraction for the C-suite set. Executives can't really plan effectively for their business operations. And when it comes to marketing, it's difficult for them to break through the political noise to deliver a message or a pitch. And so they are fairly relieved, I'm sure, to get this election behind them. Is that what you're hearing?
First of all, thanks for having me. It's a delight to be here. That is part of what we're hearing for sure. So what we do at Burson, we do a fair amount of corporate affairs, corporate advisory, and communications work. So we spend a lot of time in the C-suite. And what we realized recently was that a lot of the conversation and the discourse was around what was happening in the ballot box. But we actually wanted to move that to understand a little bit more of what was happening in the boardroom. And so we commissioned and did a survey where we looked at 1,500 employees and 500 employers. And what was really striking and what we learned is that CEOs, the C-suite, and employers actually feel that they are much more prepared for the election, even though they're distracted by it, uncertainty ensues. But they feel like they are prepared much more so than their employees. And this is really important to think about in the context of what Frank just said, which is we're not going to know this tonight. This is going to be days or weeks in the making. And so this uncertainty is trickling down into the employee ranks. So what we know is that 86% of CEOs and C-suites think that they're ready to navigate this moment, but only 53% of their employees think that, which leads to disengaged employees, distracted employees, unproductive employees, which of course from an employer's perspective leads to economic stalling, and that's a problem. So we think there's an opportunity here to bridge this.
Yeah, the expectations that the employers have are clearly not going to be met if employees themselves are feeling unheard, unseen, and distracted, like you say. So how do CEOs move forward? How do they take into account that employees, despite the employer's best preparations, are not where the employers are in terms of feeling comfortable with moving ahead?
Right. So the conversations we've been having, there's not really a playbook for this unprecedented moment that we find ourselves in, but there certainly are some principles that we have been advising our clients and would advise corporate America writ large to think about. The first is making sure you set the tone from the top. In this moment, employees are expecting to hear from their CEO, their C-suite, and what they want to hear is an acknowledgement of the environment. The external world makes its way into the halls and the cubicles of companies across America. So what CEOs need to be doing is acknowledging that for employees, but also letting them know what resources are available to them, urging patience, as Frank just said, and making it clear that they are prepared and what those preparations are to meet the moment. And then as part of that, one of the things that's required is making sure that frontline managers, midline managers are prepared to deal with moments in the coming days, weeks, and months. So what are the rules of engagement at your company around political discourse? What is constructive conversation, and when does that become disruptive conversation? And what are the criteria and the mitigation strategies there? So the CEO has to set the tone. The midline and frontline has to be ready. You need to keep a pulse on the external environment to make sure what's being said about you, your brands, your company, your employees doesn't itself create any issues. And then the fourth is just to have a rapid response plan in place so that something that bubbles up, you can address it quickly and move on.
And Craig, when it comes to the CEO setting the tone, I wonder what you make of the fact that you do have CEOs of publicly listed companies coming out and supporting candidates, declaring, which candidate they're actually going to vote for. You do have some outliers. Jamie Dimon, for example, we were all waiting with bated breath to see if he was going to come out in either direction. But do you think that that's appropriate, just the fact that CEOs, again, would come out in support of a specific candidate?
I can't speak to whether or not it's appropriate, but what's going to happen regardless is we're going to have a new administration at the end of this election cycle. So we know there's no scenario where Joe Biden continues. So it's either Harris or Trump. And regardless of what some of these executives who have actually been backing Trump or those that have backed Harris, they're going to have a constructive engagement model with the new administration. And regardless of where their point of view is, the counsel that we would give them and that we're giving our clients is independent of what you've said. The page turns on Inauguration Day, and you have to lean forward with a constructive engagement model. And we've seen that in the past where companies or CEOs back a different candidate takes office, and then the engagement model starts. Right. And so that can start directly with the candidate, with the staffers, with the cabinet. So there's different ways in that. But either way, regardless of what you've said, there needs to be a constructive engagement model.
And that's the direction that they're certainly moving in. A lot of them reaching out to the Trump campaign, for instance. Craig, really appreciate it. Craig Buchholz is U.S. CEO of Burson. All right, let's just give you a quick recap of how markets closed on the day. The S&P 500 on fire in that it closed at its session highs with all 24 industry groups in the green. There was less consistent movement in the Treasury market where you saw the 10-year yield move in both directions, and right now little changed, although, of course, over the past 6 weeks, it's been up and up for Treasury yields. Dollar weaker right now, off by 1/3%, and volatility easing just a little bit, but a lot of talk about how that might spike as we get deeper into the night. This is the close on Bloomberg. Voting is underway across the U.S., and one of the most closely watched states is Pennsylvania. The Keystone State's 19 electoral college votes, the most of the 7 swing states that will effectively decide the winner of the race. Joining us now for more on this is Bloomberg's David Gura. David, what can you tell us about turnout in this all-important state?
Well, Scarlett, by all accounts, it's been huge, and this has been a big push by both campaigns to get people to the polls here on Election Day. We can talk a bit about sort of the push they've also made to get people to vote early, but the weather here is beautiful. People are going to the polls, and over the course of the day, I've been checking in with folks, party officials from both Republican and Democratic Party across the state, just to see how things are going, how smoothly they're going. I just want to highlight a couple in particular. The first is in Lackawanna County. That is the home to Scranton, which is where Joe Biden is from. Checked in with the Republican committee chair there just a little while ago, and he told me that turnout was extremely heavy in his words, which he said is good for everyone in this country, and his sentiments were echoed by his Democratic counterpart in that county. An important one is you look at sort of what the swing county or battleground counties might be in this state. Monroe County, another one, that's in the Poconos, a place that has been trending Democratic. A lot of folks have moved from New York and New Jersey to the Poconos during the pandemic and the years since. There too, very busy and a big turnout according to the Republican Party official there. I do want to highlight the fact that there have been a few counties, a few instances where polling places are going to be open later than 8 o'clock. That's when polls close here across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. There have been a couple of court orders that are going to keep polling places open a little while longer. I'll start with Lucerne County. That is the Laughlin borough there. So one borough, one polling place in that county had some issues this morning with scanning of ballots. A judge intervened here. That polling place is going to be open until 9:30 tonight. And one other is Cambria County. That is sort of east of Pittsburgh, big important county in this state. It's going to be open until 10 o'clock tonight. And I should say the kind of ballots you'll be able to cast at those polling places, if there have been difficulties, will be provisional ballots. Those won't be counted until Friday of this week. So again, across the state, the weather has been good. That is no small matter. That has gotten people out to the polls. And just anecdotally, as I've been walking around here in the city, there have been lines to get to the polling places here. But by and large, what I've heard from everybody with whom I've been in touch is things here are going pretty smoothly.
All right. Thank you so much, David Gura. And of course, David will be back at the top of the next hour as we continue with our special election coverage on this election day. In the meantime, black voters in Pennsylvania played a pivotal role in the 2020 election, with President Biden winning 92% of the black vote in the state. And while the early data show most black voters support Kamala Harris, a recent survey from the NAACP found that 26% of black men under the age of 50 plan to support Donald Trump. Joining us for more on the importance of minority voters is Marc Morial. He is president and CEO of the National Urban League. Marc, thanks for joining us. What is the demographic, the black male demographics, number one concern across these battleground states? And what is it that the Trump campaign is saying to target them versus the Harris campaign?
It's I think black male voters, like every other voter, primarily concerned about democracy, the right to vote, and whether a Trump candidacy and a Trump presidency would wipe out the last 50 years of progress on civil rights, on voting rights, on reproductive rights, and on many, many personal freedoms. I think the early polling, which showed a little bit of an uptick among black males for the Trump candidacy, or many who may not vote, I think that's dissipated because of the efforts that have been made, significant efforts that have been made in the last 4 to 6 weeks to really talk to black male voters around economic issues and entrepreneurship issues and the issues they are concerned. So I don't put a whole lot of stock in some of these polls because at the end of the day, the majority of African-American men will vote for Harris, significant majorities, and significant majorities of African-American women. I think both numbers will be north of 90%.
Well, it's interesting, of course, when we focus on the black male vote in specifics here, because we know that the Harris campaign has tried to appeal directly to that contingent, of course, enlisting the likes of Barack Obama to appeal specifically to black male voters. And it sounds like, Marc, you're saying that that's going to bear fruit.
Well, I visited probably half a dozen barbershops in Detroit, a number of places in Philadelphia and in Atlanta and in North Carolina. I think the effort's been, and my effort has been mainly to encourage black men and black people and all people to vote and exercise their constitutional right to vote. And those have been some very interesting conversations. There's anxiety about the economy, but a recognition that a Trump presidency, and this is what I hear, that a Trump presidency would be dangerous in terms of turning back the clock on so many important issues. So I think that the effort that was made, President Obama has a special standing and a special place in the community. But I think beyond that, there have been lots of people, elected officials, ministers, community leaders, celebrities, and others, who've also put their thumb on the scale to have the conversations with black men that, quite frankly, were long overdue.
Long overdue. And I guess the frustrating thing that I hear, that I read about from black voters, is that campaigns target them and appeal to them and say what they need to say to get them to come out and vote and support their candidate. And then once the election has gone, they're kind of ignored at that point. There's no execution or delivery of some of the campaign promises that they had made. And that frustration ends up leading to voters not turning out.
And that's a valid claim. But also we've got to recognize that in today's world, information is translated through social media. It's translated through propaganda. It's translated through hyping. And I think sometimes, for example, the accomplishments or the progress that gets made gets filtered so many times before it reaches the community. Elected officials have to do a better job talking to, and listening to not only black male voters, but black voters and all voters. And I think coming out of this, I think you're going to see some changes in how those dots are indeed connected. When I was in elected office as a mayor of a major American city in New Orleans, it was really an obsession to to really try to communicate with my constituency beyond the media through lots of personal appearances, lots of community meetings, a lot of visits to places where people are. And so there needs to be that. Sometimes I find the politics of today, there's an over-reliance on social media, as though social media is the sole way or the best way. It's one way.
Yeah.
But there's nothing like face-to-face conversations with voters, nothing like conversations where voters can tell you what their pains are, their concerns are, their hopes and their aspirations. So there's going to be a lot of important takeaways from this election cycle.
All right, Marc, that's a good note to leave it on. Really appreciate your time today. That is Marc Morial. He is president and CEO of the National Urban League. Meanwhile, we do want to bring you some breaking news. This out of DJT, of all things, this coming from Trump Media and Technology, reporting a net loss for the third quarter of $19 million. Revenue coming in at $1 million. And here's an interesting one. Trump Media is also exploring growth opportunities, including M&A. You can see shares moving lower post-market, down about 4%. M&A, does that mean that they're going to buy something, or they're looking to be acquired, Scarlett?
Well, they don't make money right now, but their stock price is worth quite a bit, so that they have currency in that regard. So yeah, I suppose it's appropriate given that Donald Trump is very transactional,
right?
And now DJT is looking to make a transaction.
Yeah, we'll see. This is a company with a $7.3 billion market cap. Some really interesting headlines there. Again, Trump Media exploring growth opportunities.
$1 million in quarterly revenue.
That's true. That's true. A little bit of a disconnect. We'll continue to follow that one. But sticking with the elections, of course, both candidates have been trying to win over younger voters. And according to data from Intrvl, there's been an unexpected surge in participation from infrequent young voters this election cycle. Here in studio, I'm pleased to say, with more on his firm's findings, is Stephen McAlpine. He is the CEO of Intrvl, and Intrvl has analyzed early voter data from more than 68 million individuals. So, Stephen, quite a wealth of data that you have there. Talk us through a little bit more of what you've found.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when we look at those 68 million votes and combine it with a lot of hundreds of thousands of survey responses that we've been collecting over the last few months, we're finding a realignment, which isn't just about demographics, age, gender, race. It's more about issues. So these young voters, these are folks who care about things like healthcare, they care about housing, and they care about LGBTQ issues. But they're also the same people who before were very, kind of called the double negatives, the no-nos, the ones who weren't happy with Biden, weren't happy with Trump. They didn't like their options. And what we've seen in the last few weeks is they've gotten more energized by Kamala Harris. And they're showing up at a much higher rate than we'd expect, even after accounting for their previous voting behavior in 2022 and 2020 and previous early voting periods. So we're seeing them voting at rates like 50 to 100% more than we'd expect to this point. Now, if that continues, that's good news for Kamala Harris. Like, these folks typically would break for the Democrat. They weren't really showing strong support for Democrats earlier when it was Biden versus Trump, but now we're seeing more signs that they are supporting Kamala Harris. They are countered by some folks who are more reliable voters, older voters who care deeply about immigration and care about the economy. And so those reliable those reliable older voters don't vote early, and if they vote today in high numbers, they're going to offset some of these early voters who are younger.
So you said that they're more energized now and they seem to be hearing something that they like from the Harris campaign. What convinced them? Is it the outreach that the campaign has done? Is it political advertising?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of things. So obviously the Harris campaign has gotten a lot of support from celebrities who have reach on social media. That is helpful for getting a message out to people who don't watch the news like this or any other program, but they will see things on TikTok and they will see what Taylor Swift and others do. So the outreach through celebrities has been helpful for getting that message out. But I also think the vibes, the people talk about that, it does break through in a different way. It's not the monotony of the previous situation of the same old, same old. So I think they're excited by something different. Now, these aren't people who vote at high rates, though, so just higher than expected. So they are not the biggest section of the electorate. These infrequent voters under 50 who care about these issues, they are voting more than expected, but they're not the majority bloc. But they could be the difference.
Right, some important context there. And of course, we're talking about 68 million individual early votes, broad brushstrokes, but talk to us about what you found in the 7 swing states, collecting over 17 million early votes there. What have you seen?
Yeah, so something's very fascinating is happening in Michigan and Georgia in particular. Now, there are people who are aligning on 2 issues, democracy and abortion. Who are these people? They're actually mostly women who are older and very frequent voters. They typically vote in almost every election, but they're voting together. There's like a coalition of older women black and white mostly. And so if they continue to vote at a high rate, they could probably bring both those states towards Kamala Harris. And then in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, what everybody's paying attention to, going back to those reliable older voters who care about immigration, who care about the economy, if they vote at 95% rates, those two states could flip. They typically break for the Republican, so they're mostly over 65, and they're the ones who could make Michigan and Pennsylvania, Wisconsin go to Donald Trump. It's these over 60, over 65 immigration economy voters. If they vote at high rates today, those states go to Donald Trump.
So the older woman vote seems to be something that surprises everyone, and I point that out because of the Iowa poll, the Seltzer poll that found that contingent was supporting Harris in an unexpected way, and she's now, or at least as of the weekend, she was in the lead over Donald Trump. Is it because pollsters don't naturally look at this group and kind of separate it?
Yeah, I think there's the basic demographics, age and gender. If you look at that in one lens, there's some nuance that's missing. So it's the older women who care about abortion and democracy. They're voting heavily for Kamala Harris. The older women who care more about immigration and the economy, they're voting more heavily for Donald Trump. So it's that issue alignment that goes beyond the demographics that is actually going to be the difference maker here. It's and it's how much the campaigns can convince folks or recognize what really matters to them and speak to them about why they have the best case for those issues, whether it's the economy, whether it's immigration, whether it's abortion, whether it's democracy. It's the campaigns that resonate with those issues that really drive that turnout and will win those votes.
They are reliable voters in any case, no matter what their issue. Stephen, really appreciate your joining us today. Stephen McAlpine is CEO of Intrvl. And believe it or not, the evening is just beginning because there's a whole lot coming up in the next 24 hours. Of course, we got to start with the fact that we've got special coverage of the election on Bloomberg, starting with an extended balance of power with Kelly Lyons and Joe Matthew starting at 5 p.m. That'll take us through to 7 p.m.
I'm going to tune in right after I actually vote. I haven't done it yet.
You haven't gone to vote yet?
I did not vote early, even though it seems like if you go on Instagram, everyone had the I voted stickers early this time.
I know, they might not have a sticker for you anymore.
What's the point? Anyway.
Okay, we also have earnings, and this will be an interesting one, right?
Yeah.
CVS, I mean, obviously a healthcare company, and so it's kind of in the middle of a lot of these election concerns, but also they have a new CEO. They're trying to change strategy.
David Joyner in the spotlight here. It's an interesting test. It's also a nice reminder that even though we're also mono-focused on the election, it's still earnings season. It's still very much earnings season.
Absolutely. And after the market closed, we've got a whole bunch of companies from a range of industries, right? You've got Coty, the cosmetics company, Take-Two Interactive, it's a video game company, Match Group, online dating, Lyft, Zillow, Qualcomm, Arm. Which are you interested in following?
I guess Match Group. You always ask, is dating recession proof? Is it election proof? I guess we'll find out a little bit. But it is a nice smattering of different industries.
Yes. And economic data coming up, starting with MBA mortgage applications. And of course, we know mortgage rates have been creeping higher because of the sell-off in bonds and the two-day Fed meeting.
The two-day Fed meeting, of course, the Fed decision delayed by a day. I guess FOMC members, they need to vote just like all of us, just like me, on my way to a poll right now.
All right, Katie, you better make sure you get there and get the sticker. That does it for us. Balance of Power is up next. Joe Matthew and Katie Lyons taking you through a 2-hour special. Have a great evening, everyone. Go vote. This is Bloomberg.